A little bit about Brigadier Arun Sehgal. He is a retired brigadier of the Indian Army and is the executive director of the Forum for Strategic Initiative, a policy think tank focusing on national security, diplomacy, and track 2 dialogues. He was previously the founding director of the Office of Net Assessments, Indian Integrated Defense Staff, head of Center for Strategic Studies and Stimulation, United Services Institute of India, and senior fellow at the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis in New Delhi. His research comprises scenario planning workshops, geopolitical and strategic assessments related to Asian security and issues concerning nuclear doctrine and strategic stability in South Asia. His publications include co-authored books and net assessment for IDS, DRDO, and Indian National Security Council, among other clients. He has been a member of the task force on net assessment and simulation under the NSC and a consultant with DRDO. He has published several books and monographs. He is member of a number of Track 1.5 and Track 2 initiatives. He also has a PhD degree in strategic studies. He is also a senior fellow of strategic and regional security at Delhi Policy Group. He is a distinguished fellow at the School of Geopolitics at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. I'm very delighted to announce that he is also an important member of the International Advisory Board of the Council for Strategic Affairs. He has been on our platforms on several occasions in the past. I will introduce the topic a little bit. China's rise as a global hegemon has led to increased geopolitical competition with other major players, particularly the United States. This competition extends to various regions of the world, including the Indo-Pacific, Africa, Latin America, and influences the global dynamics. China's military modernization, nuclear capabilities, and territorial disputes with a number of neighboring countries have implications for regional stability and potential arms races. China's assertive and expansionist claims and military actions in South China Sea have raised tensions with neighboring countries and impacted freedom of navigation in the region. These disputes have broader implications for regional stability and security. I'll just show you a map of China. This is the map of China. And this is another map of China showing various provinces in China. And actually this map tells you in red color the original China. Rest of the current territory of China is expansionist occupation of China's periphery by various Chinese regimes, whether under imperialist government or Republican China or Communist China. Again shows the extent of Chinese claims and all. And I'll show you something very interesting. What is this? This is a map of the moon given by NASA. Today is 2023, and if we go by Chinese logic, it is not inconceivable that in 2123 China will be claiming this as part of China. So some housekeeping rules to our audience. Please mute yourself to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speaker. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions. No anonymous questioners, please. Please send all your questions through the chat room. Please be very precise and specific in asking questions. Don't send detailed comments in the form of monologue. We are recording this event and it will be available later on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. And as we speak, it is also being recorded on our, it is also being simultaneously broadcast on our YouTube channel. Before I invite our esteemed speaker, I must tell you that he is a true soldier who is marching on. This program was scheduled some time ago, and despite not being, well, he has decided to continue to, be part of this program. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Brigadier Arun Sehgal, and I'm trying to share his presentation. Somehow I'm having difficulty in sharing his presentation. Okay, so here we are. So as he speaks, I will be moving his slides further. Sir, the floor is yours. Kindly start.
Uh, thank you, Dr. Nitinji, for your gracious comments, remarks. Uh, yes, you're right. I wasn't keeping very well. I thought I will pull out because my temperature had gone up. But like if a commitment is made, you have to keep up with the commitment, and there are no second thoughts on that. So here I am. I may not sound very cohesive at times, but I try my best to be as as clear as possible. In my talk, I'm going to cover mm, China is a very vast topic. You can look at China from multiple dimensions. But I am going to focus today on the geophysical realities of China to share with you its geopolitical behavior. That's an important part. What is China? Why does it behave in a particular fashion? That's an issue that we will be discussing during my talk. And my second thing talk part of this is what kind of challenge does the China provide to India? How serious is the challenge? How should we look at this challenge? How do we react to this challenge, relate to this challenge, and deal with this challenge? So the first slide is what is China's strategic vision and thinking? Next one, please. This is a standard slide. Is everybody knows wants to be a multipolar, global, unipolar, Sino-centric Asia, a dominant regional power by 2035, and a global power by 2050. Next. But here I'd like to highlight to you the Chinese notion of strategic space. What does China believe what is its strategic spaces? China believes its strategic frontiers are defined as the living space of a nation, which includes zones of influence, which not only are national territories, but areas outside the state boundaries. So that's why it always tries to gobble up spaces, whether it is in the maritime domain or it is in the continental domain, to improve his strategic postures. So the notion of strategic frontiers include, as far as the Chinese is concerned, also maritime domain, as I mentioned just now, because incrementally, as I will highlight as we go along, the maritime domain is becoming a very important prospect of his power and influence, without which it feels to be and not a fully global player. Next, please. So just have a look at this. This is what China is. If you on the right side is what the Han China is all about. On the center is Qinghai Plains, that delta. That's the central focus point. And what you see is Xinjiang and Tibet, and what Dr. Nitinji in this slide had shown is the occupied territory, is the highest occupied space which has been taken over by a country post-colonial rule. This has all been asserted by China. So from the Chinese perspective, Xinjiang and Tibet are boundaries of China which are not ruled by Han Chinese, and therefore, and given the insurrections that are present over there, are a sign of weakness. As far as the the rooster with the pot belly protruding into the sea, into the Taiwan Straits is concerned, that is the area again which is worrisome because that is where the Chinese mainland, Han Chinese main power centers are, and it is all in the show window. There is no strategic depth to and because Taiwan is a disputed territory, despite the fact that everybody says Taiwan is what Taiwan is, that is integral part of Taiwan, but you can't take over Taiwan for obvious reasons. So the question is the Taiwan and the proximity of Japan and South Korea, if you look at the map, indicates to you the show window and the strategic threat with the Chinese face from the maritime domain. So what does it mean? It has it on its western borders. I'll explain it a little more later. On its western borders and areas which we occupied. One was occupied by the Turkmenistan Muslim population, which they have usurped from them, and this is where the Tarim Basin is, uh, the most focal point of his energy. All the oil and energy resources come from there. And second is Tibet, and Tibet, as we all know, is there is despite the fact that Tibet has been under Chinese control for nearly 75 years now, it is still disputed, and there is an incipient insurgency going on. So this is what the story is. Next, please. So what are the contours of strategic thinking? It looks upon itself as a geogravitational center of Asia, a strong continental power, incrementally seeking control over maritime domain, accent on naval development and modernization, etc. It can be divided into three distinct regions, each having different impact on its strategic thought. East, West, and Center. I talked about Eastern. China, heartland, cradle of civilization, center of Chinese political and economic power, located in show window, security imperative to maintain national integrity and Chinese way of life. The maritime domain sees like a swan control of near seas and domination of the first island chain an imperative. For China, it's imperative to control the first and the second island chain, and slot security is also an important thing. Therefore, the importance of Taiwan's and states around it. So China, when China flexes its muscle around Taiwan, when China has says it's its clearest red line, this is what is driving the Beijing to flex his muscle because loss of this would mean that the Chinese are facing direct threat from outside. Next, please. No, please go back. Yeah, okay. No, next slide. So,
This one.
okay, control the study Western China. Western China is a distant and isolated barrier that provides depth to heartland as also gateway to Eurasia. If you notice, all the Belt and Road Initiative roadways, railways are all taking off from this part of China and going towards Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and on to Europe. There is this area is a strategic vulnerability and dominated for security heartland. It's an area where the Chinese have to dominate. But the reality is there are no Han Chinese. So there has been a massive program of Hanization that has taken place, but it has only produced mixed results. So when West and other players are badgering China for human rights, etc., the whole logic behind this thing is that we have to acknowledge the fact that this is an illegal occupation by China and the fact that this is domination by force of ethnic people of that area. And the second part of this Western China is the Southwestern China, or what we call the Tibetan Plateau ridge of Asia. It's a great ridge of immense strategic import, a barrier to eastward expansionism of heartland. Separates China from South and Southeast Asia, is a major source of water whose management is essential for Chinese growth and development, essential to the cohesion and security and maintenance of Chinese way of life. And between these two, between the Western China, that is the Xinjiang region, and the Southern China, Tibet, lies the central plateau at the confluence of three great rivers. And this is the fulcrum which connects the two regions of the south and the north. The next slide, please. This is, go back, please. This is an important slide. What? This is an important slide. Oh, next slide. Yeah. In this slide, what has been highlighted is what is written in the Chinese in the pink is basically the desert and the Tarim Basin and the mountain ranges in the north and Tibetan Plateau and Himalayan ranges in the south. Uh, and this is what I was talking about in terms of the Western China, and this is the Southwestern China, the Tibetan Plateau, and this is the confluence of the three rivers. The three rivers being Yellow River, Yangtze, and Langkong. So this is where. So when you are looking at the Chinese trying to divert water, trying to, because if these rivers dry up, there is no major sources of water. So the Chinese efforts to damming Brahmaputra, etc., etc., are all grown by this imagination. And also, please note that with the developments that have taken place in the last 3 or 4 years, particularly on the western Ladakh region, the issue that has become important is this, and this is important to understand, is that earlier Chinese used to monitor the line of actual control through remotely through CCTV cameras. Now, for the first time in the last 4 years, they have to not only deploy troops but create major fortification. Because for the first time, the Chinese territorial space has come within the vicinity of, of a major player who has the capacity or the capability to retaliate to Chinese actions or Chinese attempts to capture territorial space. That fact that Chinese intrusions have taken place, we have not fought, etc., is a different issue, which I'll talk about it a little later. But the fact of the matter is that for the first time in history, the Chinese are feeling threat to its territorial space, and this is something which is affecting the psyche of the Chinese Military Commission. The second point, also important point, is that Western Theater Command is the most powerful command out of the out of the five commands of the PLA. If you notice towards the east, you will see there is a greater degree of integration between various commands. But moving troops, resources, and other elements into the Tibetan Plateau or against Xinjiang requires a huge amount of transportation and other logistic efforts. So there has to be a relocation of resources, building up of capacities, infrastructure, etc., to deal with those sources. Chinese did not take these things seriously earlier, but now for the first time, the costs are being imposed on the Chinese. Next, please. What are the broad implications? In my view, despite growing economic and political influence, China remains a geostrategically constrained power owing to its broadly a continental construct. Maritime borders in the east, surrounded by the first and the second island chain, pose threat to heartland and restrain Chinese maritime projections. South China Sea is a critical waterway that provides an exit to plan both in Western Pacific and Indian Ocean, and China will always fight for this important space for its own national security. Its anti-access area denial strategy is based on providing depth to vulnerable east and southeast. Western and southern borders are buffered by non-Han minorities, which form 9% of the Chinese population but control nearly 56% of its geographical space. And beyond this, as far as the Chinese are concerned, lie inimical competitors, hence the importance of the Tibetan Ridge. To secure its southern and western periphery, China is engaged in a massive development initiative, as we all know, and developing road and rail links, including Silk routes to Eurasia. Next, please. Go back, please. Security and development concepts like SCO, RCEP, EAS, BRI are means to provide security and build regional influence. China has unresolved continental borders only with India and Bhutan, and it has got three maritime borders, unresolved maritime borders, which are we're all aware. Vulnerability of maritime space is directly related to its South China Sea and Taiwan domination policy. IOR is central to securing lanes, hence the Chinese policy of bases and places. Through strategic partnership in Southern Asia, it is also aiming at constraining India, and it is also using the opportunity to use the territorial space of our neighbors like Myanmar, like Bangladesh, like Pakistan to create what I call a strategic land bridges to the warm waters of the Indian Ocean. Next, please. Now, let me just look at the China as a part of the emerging global power matrix. You all are aware of the normal quad, the quad which is United States, India, Australia, and Japan. There's a new quad developing in the global space. This is the United States, China, Russia, and India. In this quad, United States, along with India, are seen as partners by China, and China looks upon Russia as a contending coalition partner to deal with the challenge which is being posed by Western alliance system, both in Europe and incrementally in the Indo-Pacific. Next, please. So, what is the reality between emergence of US-India versus China-Russia diet? Global balance of power is between China, Russia, and US and allies in NATO. India is emerging power that is leaning towards US and its alliance partners aim to balance China. Now, those of us who do not like these terms, please understand it's just an analysis. And the whole idea basically is that this is the perception of the Chinese. Believe that despite US attempt to no sustainable security architecture in Indo-Pacific can be carved out without China. China sees India a regional power that upholds strategic autonomy and unwilling to be a pawn, not want to compromise its national interests. So it looks at it two ways. At one level, it looks at the United States partner. On the other hand, it also looks at India, sort of a soft prop giving to India to tell it that it is sworn to its strategic autonomy and will not be a pawn to any intending outside power and interests. And last and importantly is India and China have a very different view on how they look at the world order. Next slide, please. Next, China's medium-term challenge. Now I'll just highlight some issues regarding the China's medium-term challenge to India. That's where I've come to. Now we have looked at Chinese from geophysical, its geopolitical priorities, and we have looked at how it looks at the entire space around it. But now let's come to India. It looks upon India as an emerging regional power whose political, economic, security standing in Asia and globally on the rise. Relations with India are seen from the perspective of bilateral South Asian Indo-Pacific geopolitics. FOIP, Quad, and attempts at creating Asian NATO are frameworks which are seen as attempts to dominate Indo-Pacific to contain China. Congress of two oceans, that is the Pacific and the Indian, backed by compatible security architecture. Chinese feels that if this comes about, has a potential to constrain Chinese influence and diluting power advantage. China's core interest thus is to reassert its military asymmetry to gain psychological advantage in bilateral relations and influence in South Asia. Here I just want to highlight the bottom line point basically is this. China, as long as United States and its alliance partners and its other strategic partners are able to continue to maintain a reasonable amount of strategic, economic, and technological pressure on China, Chinese attempts or Chinese dreams of being a global player will always be restricted or will be restrained. Therefore, it is intrinsically important for China to create such conditions which undermine American power and influence in all its dimensions. And when we are now talking about American power, in undermining American power and influence, we are also unfortunately bringing in India as a partner, and the Chinese look at it from that perspective. From the Chinese perspective, while the Western Pacific and East Asia are well dominated by United States, it is the Indian Ocean region which is the western bookend, which has only as a India as a regional player, and the Chinese believe the multiple of coercion, bellicosity, inducement, all kinds of elements, economic inducement, etc., are important to ensure that India does not become a full-fledged club member of this group. Next, please. So, what is China's India challenge? The core dilemma for the Chinese is the perception of India's power in the medium term. What kind of India will emerge? What will be its comprehensive national park? If its economic growth continues the way it is and it continues to develop its industrial technological base, of which we have just seen two uh, important visits which have all about developing technological capabilities with important Western partners, the issue basically becomes is that how will India's comprehensive national power will be in relation to the Chinese by say mid 2030s or even late 2030s. So what we are looking at is in the next window of about 10 to 15 years, how how does this whole thing how does this whole thing pan out? Chinese are aware India is an aspirational strategic outlook and alignment with power balancing partnership Indo-Pacific is part of a well-conceived deterrence strategy. So therefore, the core concern for the Chinese is if India gets fully integrated into this system security architecture, this can seriously impede China's strategic ambitions by creating a multi-domain military challenge with perpetuating opportunity costs. It's not only the military challenge, it's the opportunity cost that will come with that. That's going to be important for the Chinese. A strong nuclear India aligned to US-led security architecture, not aligned, not a word, a partnership in partnership with US-led security architecture in Asia is seen as a rallying point for regional states, both in Southeast and West Asia. Next. So what are the major underpinnings of Chinese strategy against India? First, wear down India externally and domestically, including muscular revisionism to compel regional neighbors to accede to Beijing and against India. We are seeing that what's happening on our western borders with Pakistan. We're seeing what's happening in Myanmar. We're seeing what's happening in Nepal in the north. We are also seeing to a degree how Bangladesh is being manipulated. So all the India's neighborhood is being propped up against India. If India is militarily, economically weakened, its value, it's a belief that if India can be militarily, economically weakened, its value as a counterweight to US goals of countering China will get undermined. In other words, China is targeting India through by leveraging overwhelming geopolitical, strategic, and economic advantage using coercion and bellicosity. Next, please. The sum total of Chinese strategy, therefore, is to maintain continuous pressure on India, albeit in different proportions. So, if you hear what happens in Vietnam when Foreign Minister meets Wang Yi, they're talking about is we will settle the boundary issue, don't make it a central core issue, but let's get on with it. It's just one part of a large number of issues amongst us. Let's do it. We will redraft the agreement, CBM agreement, etc. But let's move forward. The whole notion is moving forward. There is new element which is coming in, and that is an attempt is being made, and I am seeing this thing only in recent days. An attempt is being made to marginalize India's in institutions like BRICS and SCO. If you read the Chinese narrative is saying is India is now gone too far to the west. India is an unscrupulous player. India is not fully committed to our values, and therefore India will not support the de-dollarization, global de-dollarization. Look at the way it handled the SEO meet. It has got too many other problems. So we have to take a call on how to do it. In fact, there are commentaries coming out these days which are indicating its time has come for India to be uh, asked to leave, or we have to do something to contest India's attitude to these institutions. The next is weakening India through combination of military pressure, regional strategic encirclement, and that's all we have talked about. If India is weakened militarily and economically, its value as a counterweight, we talked about nothing, and China's regional influence will get undermined. So basically, the whole idea is a continuous pressure on India, political, geopolitical, strategic, and regional, to contain India, which is seen as weak but fastly uh, developing economically and militarily and technologically. And they believe that if India is given an uncontested space, it will become a major rival in about another 15, 20 years. Next, please. So, I talked about in the medium term, it will persist on continental and maritime strategy. What will be military build-up and pressure along the LSA will continue, along with posturing and intrusions. Idea is to impose military and political costs, forcing Indian political leadership to accommodate and simultaneously forays in the Indian Ocean. But here there are two things which are important. We have this habit of believing that we have been constrained on the LSE standoff. In another talk which I gave somewhere else, I highlighted to people that the Chinese have very serious dilemma of continuing with status quo or reverting to status quo ante. Status quo, building up capacities, capabilities, maintaining 100,000 troops, repooling resources, etc., etc., for an economy which has gone down to 3%, which is having internal problems, is becoming a serious issue for the Chinese. It is not easy for them to maintain it. As indeed it is not easy for us to maintain it, but over a period of time, since we had always maintained a large force levels in these areas, it is our costs are reasonably amortized. Therefore, what are the Chinese options? How long will Chinese continue the current standoff with us? That's one issue. The second issue is it cannot go back to status quo ante completely, because status quo ante means why did they start this whole ball game in the first place? So the issue that is worrisome for the Chinese thinking is what is the level of compromise? This is important part. What is the level of compromise that we have to do? And If we are if we are not clear about this issue, then we will be failing on our thinking. Therefore, the Chinese vulnerability over here is our strength. This is something which we need to understand. Next, please. India's response. What has rattled China is instead of succumbing to India, has taken up the challenge headlong. Situation along the LS is marked by, I just talked about it. This has been possible through shift in Indian military strategy from dissuasion to deterrence that includes redeployment of strike formations, etc. And now we are in the process of developing our own so-called missile or rocket force, whatever you, with with up to medium range capability, with precision strike capability. That will change the narrative slightly more, and that is an issue because please understand that in the period that we have had some major increments in our military capability, and those are carrying on. And with the induction of the system that we're about to buy, in another 7, 8, or 10 years' time, I say 2030 beginning, we would have changed the narrative of our capacity. Now that's something which is worries them. The issue with them is military confrontation was designed to demonstrate regional supremacy by catching India off guard through deception and surprise. This has clearly not worked. Indian actions have shown strong and determined political and military response is a good model to deal with Chinese bellicosity. Next. May Chi- Go back, please. May China realize that in the continental context, to leverage its asymmetrical advantage has little option but to escalate and face unacceptable attrition. Use of non-contact means such as rocket forces and reciprocal warfare could escalate to nuclear thresholds. Xi's aggression breaching bilateral border peace agreement has made India politically, economically, and militarily determined. I talked about it. India today is more determined than ever to counter Chinese power and work with like-minded powers in Asia and Europe. And India is cognizant that the challenge is multi-domain and China will continue to course even as it talks of building better relationship. For China, backing off without tangible gains is tantamount to accepting credibility of the Indian power and emergence of strong reshored India. An unacceptable proposition, and there lies the dilemma. Thank you very much for your attention. No, I want this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Brigadier Arun Sehgal, for a very informative uh, presentation on strategic challenges coming from China. Uh, Before we start taking questions from our audience, and our audience is requested to send their questions to the chat room, I do have a comment. Uh, in your presentation, you mentioned that China has basically resolved all the land boundary issues with all its neighbors except for India and Bhutan.
Yeah.
Although that is true by and large, but China continues to have land border issues with Nepal. So there are still bones of contention between the two countries, although it is
Okay.
very usual for Nepal to play China card, especially before the previous Prime Minister Oli.
Hmm.
China still has claims over Nepalese territory. Any comments?
Yeah, I know Nepalese politicians very well. I played the game with the Nepalese for a number of years. Yeah, they are fair wind people. They will go with one person today, go with the next person. What the Nepalese basically are interested in investments and investments and to upgradation of their infrastructure on terms where they which are negotiated politically and the execution is outside the purview of agencies. So you have to understand that logic. So when once that happens, the Chinese companies build the roads, etc. The money is changed hands, and the political leaders give the statements that they give. But essentially speaking, is there is no. And if you recollect when India put that blockade against Nepal, we were told that we will get petrol from China. Just go back to and check how much petrol came. Not even 10% of the requirement came from China. So it's a I mean, technically you may be right, but by and large, I mean, I will not this thing question you on that. I respect what you say, but I think Nepalese are reasonably good manipulators.
I perfectly agree with you, but nevertheless, there are some bones of contention with
Yes,
China's
absolutely,
peripheral neighbors.
absolutely,
Uh,
absolutely. I
so
stand correct.
India and Bhutan are not in the unique situation. Uh, Again, before going to the questions from our audience, I have one more question for
Yes.
you.
Mhm.
As China is facing strategic challenges from within, its economy slowing down substantially, there being some political opposition to the paramount leader, Xi Jinping, and Chinese demographic challenges of an aging population not having enough workers. The trajectory is not for rising China, but the trajectory that might happen in next 20 years is of a weakening and declining China. In other words, China has already achieved its supreme level of comprehensive national power. In that scenario, occupation of Inner Mongolia will be feasible, or Mongolia will try to reclaim Inner Mongolia from China.
Uh, you know, in the context of China, which you are talking about, economically getting weaker, politically distracted, a lot of internal problems, etc. That's a possibility that exists. I mean, as you are aware, Mongolia has changed sides. The Inner Mongolia is a very important piece of ground. But I do not think, to me, a bigger possibility is what we talk about externalization of internal challenges. The externalization of the internal challenges could be an initiation of some kind of hostile action. Now, out of the various options that the Chinese have, I do not, in my view, the hostilities with India is not one of their primary concerns. That doesn't get them any strategic advantage, particularly on the continental domain. They have, you know, got whatever they wanted. They believe that they have managed the whole thing. But the Taiwan scenario could become hot. And that is where the worry could be. So, a nationalistic China, which is weak economically, politically, but strong militarily, has the military wherewithal, could use that as a rallying point to, if nothing else, to disturb the regional order and create a situation which brings the nation together under the party flag once again, so that there is a consolidation of national power within the Chinese military political leadership takes place. That's, to me, can be a scenario which is worrisome. Mongolia, yes, it can happen, but Mongolia is too far off and away from the sentiments of people to give China, give anybody, and I believe that Chinese will certainly fight back. I mean, the Chinese have enough credibility to deal with the Mongolians. I mean, the another issue that's worrisome is this, is that what we have seen so far in all these years is the Chinese have not had had fought any wars, or they have not used their manpower or weapons capability anywhere since the Vietnam War. They haven't. So they are not too sure. They're not even too sure how well their system will work under operational conditions. And we are seeing firsthand where a lot of advanced weapon systems, etc., on both sides in Ukraine, we are finding them not particularly behaving in the manner in which the good firms of the military industrial complex sell their specifications and, and their systems. So, I have my doubts that China has the will do. But China certainly can, we have played a lot of scenarios on that, on externalization of the country. They can do it with us also. But the question with us is, what is you want to use 30 divisions or 20 divisions or 15 divisions against us? But he knows that we will bring in the same amount. And then there will be, and in this case with India, please remember one thing. With China attacking India, there will be a loss of territorial space for China. That is something which the Chinese are not willing to accept easily. It's not that China can attack India and get away with it. No, there will be a loss of territorial space. I don't know how many kilometers we will go inside and how much damage we will do to its infrastructure. But that is something which the continental China is worried about, because that will indicate that is its fraying power, as you very rightly put it.
So I'm going to take a question from one of our audience. And to be very frank, I already know the answer, but I'm going to put the question to you for sake of transparency. The question comes from Mr. Bhagwat, and it's a very simple question. To balance China militarily, should India focus on her land forces or navy?
Short-term land forces, long-term navy, maritime forces.
Okay. I am going to go to the next question. Given China's assertion in South China Sea, how do you see China's expanding influence in the South Asian region? Isn't this resulting into containment of India's influence in this region? And this question comes from Indu Krothwal.
Uh, Please understand one thing. Like I said, China is a constrained power. China has to move outside the South China Sea and into the Indian Ocean region. We have, rightly speaking, become part of the Maritime and Domain Initiatives and the MDA in the IP, New Maritime Domain Initiative of the Indo-Pacific, etc., etc. We have enough understanding of capacity of what movements are taking place. We should be in a position to deploy our forces in time and in space to contest the Chinese move forward. The big question that comes about is this: does India feel threatened if a big Chinese flotilla of carrier battle groups and a couple of other element support ships moves into the Indian Ocean region, ostensibly for exercises? How would we react? We need to lay down the limits to these Chinese movements. It's all very well to say that oceans belong to everybody, they are for everybody to see, but hostile movements in certain areas are need to be contested. Now, I am not aware what is our thinking on this, because I have always like to understand how will we react to these movements. Number one. Number two, there are always thoughts about uh, the Chinese ability to create a challenge and deploy in these places like Hambantota, come for bases and repairs, and also move to Gwadar, etc. The question for us is this: there are two things which become important. One, we have been working assiduously for, and I say we did a big study on this with CISS on how to create strategic architectures in Indian Ocean. Try to bring in countries like France, Australia, Indonesia. They talk about them, And the second is building up capacities and capabilities. We cannot allow South China Sea to happen to Indian Ocean region. The birds have flown when the Americans started looking at South China Sea. South China Sea had become a Chinese lake. We cannot allow Indian Ocean region to become Chinese zone of influence. It needs to be contested. How you want to contest it? There are a large number of intelligent people from the Navy and etc., or we can have a discussion on that. I'm willing to do that because I've done some work on it. But the point at issue is very simple, is we cannot allow this to happen. And this is a serious challenge for us. We continue to say Indian Ocean region is our region, ocean. We have control about it. But the nature and the manner we want to exercise control, etc., needs a greater degree of analysis and greater degree of force capability, and more important is a force employment understanding to go ahead and do this.
That was an excellent answer. Before I take the next question from the audience, I have a supplementary question to ask you. Uh, in order to prevent Indian Ocean from becoming Chinese zone of influence, maritime influence, China is leaning on the government of Thailand. And Thailand has its own internal problems, military versus civilian governments over the last decade or so. There's a pressure on Thai government to give concrete shape to Krai Canal project, which has been conceptualized for 200 years. And with the $3.3 trillion reserves, if Krai Canal is built, China's Malacca dilemma will be solved. In such a scenario, what should the external powers do to prevent Thai government from succumbing to Chinese pressure?
Okay, two, three things, sir. One, first point is it's too ambitious a project to be executed easily. A, canals are canals are never an answer to provide the kind of shipping requirements that large ships will have. Basically, what we are talking about is uh, providing them, an alternative trading route via the Kra Canal. We are aware of that, but it's a cost prohibitive, low utility project, I would say. I'll speak cost prohibitive, low utility project. ठीक है.
Okay.
And I
I'm
think
going.
I think its value in terms of to the Chinese will be, I would say, very, very unproductive for the money spent.
Next question is from Suresh Rai, and he's saying, is China responsible for Mizoram events? Any comments? I'm not sure whether he's referring to Manipur events or Mizoram events, but that's a question.
It's Manipur. I'm sorry, Aditya.
Okay, so Manipur events. I thought it was Manipur events.
My personal view is no. This is a fight between cookies, Meiteis, and if you've been to that area, you realize that the Meiteis had it so good all this time. And the kind of new this thing uh, ruling backward area, they are getting more benefits, and so they were usurping the cookies believed that they are usurping the right. The problem with this is the Metis think that cookies are not part of Manipur. They are outsiders. They are actually it's true. Cookies live in Mizoram. They are Mizo tribals. So it's a localized, terrible, localized, badly handled issue. I do not think Chinese have either the capacity or the capability Apart from the fact is they're using some routes, as we are all aware. Today I was reading how the Thai-Myanmar border is being used for arms smuggling, etc. Similarly, as you all know, More is a sanctuary for all kinds of drug trade. So, drug trade, arms, weapons, etc., could have come from, but I don't think it's something that we should worry about. Give it to the Chinese. It's not a capability. I will give it to the Chinese, sir. Thank you.
I go to the next question, and it is from Mr. Vijay Nilikeni. Is strategic autonomy realistic in the long run, especially if Russia veers strongly towards China because of survival and other compulsions post Ukraine?
You want me to be political or correct?
You can be as honest as possible.
No, there is nothing known as strategic autonomy. You have to weigh your choices and take a decision which fits in with your national interest. There's no strategic autonomy. It's national interest, independent national decisions to safeguard national interests. We did that in 1971 when we signed with Russia. Our relationship with that we are trying to knock out are also part of our national interest, both with the United States, even now with France, etc. So the idea basically is this, that India strategic autonomy has become a word that which is people are trying to attach to non-alignment. India is no longer aligned. India is interest aligned. Where is interest, we will align ourselves. And my second point I want to tell your audience is this. When you say you're a big guy, you have big challenges. And if you have got big challenges, you need to develop capacities and capabilities to deal with those big challenges. Nobody is going to treat you as a third world country and get love. Now you see the kind of articles which are being written against India. Today I read a Rusi story, how India cannot be trusted by the Americans. There are another lot of stories coming up. It cannot be trusted. India should not be trusted, etc. The whole ideation is Japanese. Nikkei comes out with a story the other day. See, the whole idea is to poison minds of the people, particularly of 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 whites and the Western origin, is to basically say that, hey, how are you putting so many eggs in the Indian basket? Are you even conscious that this basket will deliver? And adding to that, in the backdrop are the Chinese. And in putting our eggs in some of these baskets, we are shaving off our eggs from another basket, which is the Russian basket. So it's an intelligent gameplay, I mean, intelligent power play that is taking place. And since it's an intelligent power play, we need to be conscious of how to handle it. And this requires dexterity, both at political level, at diplomatic level, and even in the national security level. I.e., India has to take a whole of government approach in dealing with these challenges. It cannot be ministry oriented approaches like is the case in India. We cannot have it that way. There has to be a central registry, and that is why when we saw NSA leading the charge, both in United States as well as in France, there is a certain degree of, let's put it this way, the whole of government approach being put together so that all elements of the governance are on the same page as to what does India want. I hope, sir, I've been of some clarity on this issue from my perspective. This is my perspective, sir.
I think that's the most wise answer to the question. I'll go to the next question. What are the top three opportunity areas for India to pivot from defensive approach to work towards regaining its lost territory?
I just said, sir, that first and foremost is that we have to work with the Chinese to resolve the two or three other friction points, and particularly the Dapsang Valley. In strategic terms, Dapsang Valley is the most critical part for us. particularly if you look at it from a continental Chinese threat point of view, and similarly in the eastern sector. That's part one. Part two is that we have to upgrade our capability and capacity to to impose military costs on China should it be required. And third is that we need to upgrade our defense economic ecosystem as well as develop our economic capacity and capability to sustain that system. And in this, I would like to also mention that developing an integrated, internal oriented defense ecosystem is not good enough for a country like India. India has to bring in export orientation of its weapons and capabilities as part of it. You cannot sustain a program to develop 100 aircrafts over 20 years and then say, I built up such a capability. We see what happened in Scorpion deal. We built Scorpion, we have to go through three more Scorpions. Why? Otherwise, this whole thing would have been lost like in the HGW case. So you see, there are, when I say whole of government approach, this is becoming a serious subject other than file pushing in the system. It has to be thought through. It has to be thought through the entire thing to come to what is India want, what does India's requirement is, and that is related to India's strategic vision 2035, 2040.
One more question. It is from Mr. Bhagwat. Is Chinese stance driven by Xi Jinping's aggressive personality, or is it a long time CPC strategy?
Sir, in my presentation today, I try to provide you with the geopolitical, geographical realities of China. So, as India's capability, comprehensive national power, etc., grows, India will be seen as a challenger. And continental challenge, which challenges their territorial sovereignty, will be seen as a major issue in their part. And to that extent, this is not whether Xi Jinping is one, it will be driven by the Chinese leadership, hugely supported by Central Military Commission and the PLA. In my view, the drivers of whatever happened to us in May 20, but not so much as Xi Jinping, but the PLA leadership. And they will continue to be the driver. There is a belief in the world that the PLA leadership is second to the paramount leader. The reality is that this paramount leader and the PLA leadership are closely in hand in glove in looking at the global order and how it is impacting China's rise. They are not two different people. They work in harmony.
I am glad that you said that. There's a myth or a delusion that everything will be hunky-dory between India and China. If CCP was to disappear and a so-called democratic government comes in China, because the track record is that even under the Republican Sun Yat-sen government and in the Kuomintang government under Chiang Kai-shek, China's expansionist policies towards India and claiming territories of India were the same as that of communist China. So a regime change probably may not be beneficial because China inherently is an expansionist, imperialistic power that aims total hegemony around the whole world. And those are my actually closing comments. I am highly thankful to Brigadier Arun Sehgal, who, despite not being well, decided to soldier on and come on our platform for this very important lecture. I'm also thankful to our audience on Saturday morning who are spending an hour and plus time on this particular topic. We hope that Brigadier Arun Sehgal will keep on guiding us in his advisory role as a member of the advisory board, and he'll keep on gracing our platform in various roundtable discussions and future strategic lectures. So, namaskar. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for your gracious
Thank you,
appearance.
sir. And thank you for the honor of getting me on your advisory board. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So, with those comments, we will be closing the meeting.